The objective of this video is to learn how to graph and make data tables using Google Sheets. In front of me, I have example data that has a data table and line graph on the effective temperature on the number of tomatoes. So we are going to take this and make Google Sheets graph it for us. So I already have my Google Sheet open. Google Sheets is this green icon and it is a spreadsheet program. And so each one of these boxes is called a cell. And you can see these gray lines. And so this is perfect for setting up a data table. So I'm just going to start typing out my data table. Temperature, number of tomatoes. Okay. One quick thing I want to show you. On Google Sheets, we always want to give ourselves a title. So we'll say tomato graph example so that we can find it later. But one thing I'd already set up that I want to show you is called text wrapping. Up here, just like on Google Docs or Microsoft Word or any other program like this, we can edit the text. So you can change the font, the size, all that stuff. But one thing I suggest you doing is wrap. This is default, it says overflow. And so it's going to run into the cell next to it, any text you put in. I find that annoying. I like putting in wrap, and you can play around with other things to learn what they do. Okay. All right. And so for temperature, also we need to put in degrees Celsius. There we go. All right. And you'll see it drop down. So what I'm just going to do is transfer my data over. And so I'm going to put in 8, and then I'm going to hit enter, which just drops me right next to the next cell, and keep on going. There's my temperature. Number of tomatoes, 4, 10, 14, 18, 24, 16. Now I have a data table. My graph is going to end up looking just like this. And let me show you how to do that. So first things first, I have to select my data. Watch what happens if I just go to insert chart. No data. I have students do this all the time, like, well, it's not graphing. And so what we need to do is select our data. 2 ways to do this. Click and drag with your trackpad or mouse, or you can click this top left box, hold down Shift on your keyboard, and then without having to drag with your mouse, click down here, and then it selects the data. So 2 ways to select data. Now that it's selected, I can see it's selected because it's blue. Insert chart. Ta-da! I have a graph, which is pretty cool. So the program made that for me. And so I want to show you one more problem that students often run into. So I put degrees Celsius here. What if instead I just put it here? I'm going to use a capital C for all of this. And number of tomatoes, usually we don't have a unit because it's just right up here. But what if we put, centimeters or something on here, right? So if we were measuring something else. Okay. Whenever we put text into a data table, the computer program is not able to compute that. Spreadsheets are basically like calculators. So now if I select this data and I click insert chart, no data. It can't figure out that the C means Celsius, that the centimeters is a unit of measurement. And so the only time that we can put words or letters, characters into a graph and make it make sense is if it's a bar graph and it's our independent variable. We can't have all these centimeters and units and stuff like that here. Otherwise, if it's a line graph, only numbers. Otherwise, it's not going to graph for you. Okay, so I've erased all those. Let's select this again, insert our chart, and ta-da! The spreadsheet also will predict what kind of graph you want. And this time it predicted correctly, which is great, a line chart. And if you want to change that, if it predicts wrong, you can go through all the other cool graphs and charts they have and pick the correct one. What I'm going to show you now is how to customize. To get to the chart editor, if you don't have it open, you click on the graph and you click on these 3 dots and you go to edit chart. And so we're going to click on customize, and these are all the different things that we can change about the graph. As with most things Google, there's always more than one way to do things. We can also click right on the elements of the graph itself, and that'll correspond to these over here. So this is the chart title. And so if I click here, it opens up the chart title menu, which I could also edit over here. So I want to make a nicer title. So we're going to do effect of temperature on number of tomatoes. Nice. In this case, my Y and X axis labels are correct. They're just exactly what I typed here. So I don't need to change those, but I could do that by double clicking here or going to horizontal axis title, vertical axis title. All right. Up next, this is the most fun part of editing graphs, I think, is the actual line itself. So I can click on the line or click on series, and I can change the line color. Let's do red for tomatoes. I could change some of these other features, but what I really like doing is putting in points, my data points. Just if I were graphing it by hand, you could see the little dots. And so 2, I think, is a little small. I prefer 7-point dots. And then I also like clicking this button here that says data labels, because then it actually puts that y-axis value, in this case, number of tomatoes. So I know that at 8 degrees Celsius, exactly 4 tomatoes grew at 12, 10, etc. So that's kind of nice. So that's series. All right, you can add a legend if you'd like. I don't think it's really necessary for a graph like this, but maybe on a bar graph or if there were multiple lines. And then we have our horizontal axis and our y-axis. So I want to go back to this graph. See how here I counted by ones and I actually started at 0. And so this graph kind of looks a little bit steeper. So we want to make sure our graph is really accurately portraying the data that we collected. And so by having it start at 8 and end at 24, it kind of smooths it out a little bit. I do actually want to add in all those other values that we could have tested even though we didn't collect data for. So on horizontal axis, see how I have minimum, maximum? That's for the range of data. And so here I'm actually going to click 0, and max I'm going to click 26. And we can see we actually have all these values on our data table now, and this actually looks more like the one we graphed by hand. In addition to that, I can go down here on grid lines and ticks and see how it just jumps from 0 to 5, and it's just these really big cells. If we want it to look more like graph paper, so it says minor spacing type, we can tell it to add lines in between 0 and 5. And how many lines are between 0 and 5? 4. So now it's added in these lines more like a graph, or by hand on paper. And I can add in major ticks. So there's like a dark line that shows that. You can even add in minor ones, which I don't really like, but if you like it, it's your personal preference. And so now my horizontal axis is looking pretty nice. And so then I can play around with my vertical axis. The values here are pretty good, 0 to 25. This was the highest value. If you see here, this data label gets cut off. So I could go back to series, and instead of my data labels being in an auto position, I can put them to the right, and then they all show up. Or I can extend my vertical axis. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that you can do to customize your graph. And I recommend that after watching this video, trying this on your own and playing around with all of these different chart editing tools. So the last thing I want to do is add in grid lines and ticks to my vertical axis. So same thing, it goes 0 to 5. What's in between? 4. And now it looks like graph paper. It looks like I could have graphed this on hand, but it's much faster. You don't have to add in all these extra details. It's just something that I wanted to show you. But this is a really nice and efficient way of graphing, making Google Sheets do it for you. And I hope this video was helpful.